And now live on Book TV, an author discussion on how privacy has changed in the digital age from the Annapolis Book Festival in Maryland.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Annapolis Book Festival. I'm going to ask everybody to please turn off your cell phones, mute it in some way, shape, or form so we don't disturb these fine gentlemen here. For the first 30 minutes, I'm going to be asking questions, but afterwards I'm going to ask you to line up and please ask them questions. Ideas, comments are welcome as well, so just right there in the center. My name is Bruce Schwartz, and I am the head of the Academic Technology Department here at the wonderful Key School, and I welcome you. Prior to making some introductions for these gentlemen, I just want to throw out some points that I would like you to consider, especially as they're making their comments, but then also when you want to do your questions. First, according to Symantec, which is an internet security company, in 2014, internet threat report threats increased by organized crime gangs by 23% last year. Of that, the healthcare industry was hit with 37% of the breaches. That includes Anthem. 11% was the retail market, Target, and 10% in the education sector. A friend of mine just told me the other day that Samsung TVs, their smart TVs, in their terms of service agreement has a clause that says, please be aware that if your spoken words include personal or other sensitive information, that information will be among the data captured and transmitted to a third party through your use of voice recognition. And of course, on a daily basis, we hear about NSA surveillance. So with that, what I would like to do is introduce these fine gentlemen, and for the first 30 minutes, I will be asking them questions, and then the final 15 minutes, we will invite you to come up to the microphone. Directly to my right is Marc Rotenberg. He is the President and Executive Director of the Electronic Privacy Information Center in Washington, D.C. He teaches information privacy and open government law at Georgetown University Law Center and frequently testifies before Congress on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues. Mr. Rotenberg testified before the 9/11 Commission on Security and Liberty, Protecting Privacy, Preventing Terrorism, and has authored many amicus briefs for federal and state courts. Mr. Rotenberg is the co-editor of Privacy in the Modern Age. In the center is Amitai Etzioni, who is a university professor and professor of international relations at George Washington University. He served as a senior advisor at the Carter White House and taught at Columbia University, Harvard Business School, and the University of California at Berkeley. A study by Richard Posner ranked him among the top 100 intellectuals. Professor Etzioni is the author of The New Normal, Finding a Balance Between Individual Rights and the Common Good. And at the end, we have Jim Dwyer. Jim writes the About New York column in the New York Times. He has worked in newspapers for 35 years. Last year, he published with Touch Press an interactive book called False Conviction, Innocence, Guilt, and Science that uses games, videos, and multimedia tools to show how the mistakes we make in everyday life can become embedded in criminal justice system. Mr. Dwyer has written or co-authored 5 other books, including 102 Minutes, The Unforgettable Story of the Fight to Survive Inside the Twin Towers, which was a National Book Award finalist. Mr. Dwyer is the author of More Awesome Than Money, a book about 4 young men looking to help others protect their privacy from Facebook. So first, we're going to start with Jim. Jim, during a recent conversation that you and I had, you mentioned that privacy and privacy settings are an illusion. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then I think that you have something very interesting to show up on the screen.
Sure. We all know that we don't want mom to be looking at the picture of us on Facebook with the Budweiser logo printed around our navels, or any other number of crazy things that might end up in a public space like Facebook. So over the last 5 or 6 years, Facebook, prodded by some of its erstwhile competitors, has made fine-grained control part of its offerings to the users. And that says, okay, I can set up this post so it's only seen by this body of friends, or that post only goes to the people on my softball team, or what have you. But one thing that is never excluded from that, whatever you put up there, is that Facebook itself sees all. It is omniscient. And it even knows when you have had second thoughts. You've started to write something and X'd it out, thought better of it before you hit the post button. There's actually, they've done some extensive studies at Facebook about this, what they consider lost content. Most of us would consider it, perhaps prudent speech. But we are in an age of what I consider the big bang moment of the digital age, right? Things are still flying around, taking shape in ways that we have really no ability to discern yet. And privacy is one of these terrifyingly complicated parts of it. But we should all consider where the World Wide Web came from, where many of its most useful features came from. They were built by individuals. They were not built by corporations. They were the ideas of a few people who were able to use sweat equity rather than major capital equity to make important advances. Right. So that's how I ended up writing about these four young guys, four boys who were college students who decided they wanted to try and build an alternative to Facebook. They didn't succeed yet. But one of the places that has this do-it-yourself, drag yourself up by your bootstraps DNA that I think is intrinsic to understanding the age that we're in is Mozilla, which makes a browser called Firefox. And I'm going to show you a little tool that Firefox has that you can add to your browser. Okay, so if you all spin around there and look up at the screen, so there are things called add-ons that you can attach to your browser, and there's one called Lightbeam that I'm particularly fond of. So what Lightbeam does is keep an eye on who or what has attached itself to your browser without you necessarily knowing it. Okay? Now, right now, this doesn't look like a whole heck of a lot. I'm just going to, whoops, close this thing here. Whoops. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so what we're going to do here is try a couple of sites. Let's see, ESPN, okay, worldwide leader in something or other. New York Times, I've heard of that paper. Let's try C-SPAN. Let's see what happens when we put on C-SPAN. What is it, cspan.org, .com? .org, yeah. And there we are. Boy, this is very meta. And let's just go for, let's say, Citibank. Happens to be a bank I know. Okay, now we're going to go back to Lightbeam. There are the things that, all of those triangles represent third-party trackers that have attached themselves to my browser in the last 90 seconds, okay? So here's the New York Times, and around it, somehow Facebook got in there. Google is in there. I don't know what IMR Worldwide is. NewYorkTimes.com, Facebook.com, and there's C-SPAN, which is connected to Typekit.net, which is connected to the Times as well, so they kind of, as you can see, are cousins by marriage. And there's C-SPAN video. Down here we have down here. Oh, that's Citibank, and what do they got on there? Google is in there, and Google. Now, Google is our friend, right? Except Google is collecting every single bit of information, every thought you have, and auctioning it off every second of the day.
So, Jim, the 16 third-party sites, those apply to the 4 sites that you have up there right now?
Correct, that's right. So up at the top, you'll see 4 sites, 16 third-party sites. Now, if we just add a few more things in there, I'm not going to do it now, put in Home Depot, put in whatever you might be interested in shopping for, you'll find within a few minutes a proliferation. Your entire screen will be in motion with this thing. Now, this is sort of meant to terrify you, but you know, only in the sense that when kids take driver's ed, they're shown videos of car crashes, right? What happens when you don't wear your seatbelt? What happens when you don't do this? This is part of what our education, our social education ought to involve, the level of tracking that is invisible to us until we turn on something like this light beam site.
So, Mark, is that terrifying?
Well, I don't think it's terrifying. I think it's actually a reflection of how we're in the very early stages of a policy discussion about the future of privacy. And that, of course, is why we decided to write a book titled Privacy in the Modern Age, The Search for Solutions. And I should say a few words about the genesis of the book, because it will help you understand, I think, the significance of the privacy issue, not only in our daily lives, as Jim has just described, the enormous frustration of people trying to understand who collects information about them, which is a very real problem, but also the big policy and legislative questions that the Congress confronts, the courts confront, diplomats between the United States and the European Union currently discuss about the flow of data. We are in the midst of one of the most significant policy debates concerning the use of technology, I would say, in a very long time. And again, just returning to the book briefly, it is partly about the beginning of an organization I founded with various colleagues and friends more than 20 years ago called the Electronic Privacy Information Center. And the book traces our history. Now, here's the remarkable part about the book, and coming back to some of Jim's points, how very familiar these issues are. What we were concerned about in 1994 was the NSA's monitoring of Internet communication. And what we were concerned about was the use of vulnerable technologies that did not provide adequate privacy for email. And what we were concerned about was a lack of security and stability in network communications. Now, this has been a very big debate, you know, since Mr. Snowden disclosed documents in June of 2013. These are the same issues we were talking about 20 years ago, and trying at that time to establish some baseline expectations for privacy in the modern age. Now, part of the book is also about the many people that we've worked with and our expert advisors who are legal scholars, technology experts, people like Ron Rivest and Whitfield Diffie, for example, who provided the building blocks for modern security standards and the development of encryption techniques that all of you rely on, by the way. When you go online and you make a purchase through Amazon and you type in your credit card number, there's a reason you can do that securely. And that's because in the early days of the online economy, certain decisions were made about ensuring that your credit card number could pass from your computer to the host computer without anyone getting access to it, at least in theory, if that were